Hi, I'm Lauren. Welcome to another session of Partnerships in Play. We have a fantastic guest for you today, but firstly, with myself and Michelle Teo, who's in the background here, we are developing Partnerships in Play, which is a resource for partnerships leaders and alliances leaders to develop high-performing partner programs, focus on activation and making sure that our partnerships are performing to the best ability they can. In our day-to-day life, Michelle and I help SaaS companies grow what they're doing and take things to the next level and effectively drive more partner revenue. Now, today we have Mike Nevin with us. He's the managing director and founder of Alliance Best Practice, and he's a former co-chair of Women Alliances, which is a fantastic community that I'm a part of. If you haven't heard of them before, definitely check them out. He's contributed and established an absolute laundry list of alliances, of about 800 in his career. Massive alliances like between Adobe and Accenture. So I think we have a lot to learn from him today. But he's established a number of best practices that he shares with his clients and the alliances community, and today with us. And for those of us who work more so in partnerships, I think there's a lot that we can glean from what the best alliances in the world are doing for how we can improve our partner programs. Now, the topic today, and here's Mike. I'll add him to the stage. Hi, Mike. Can we hear you?
Hey, Lauren.
There we go. So before we jump in, I just wanted to give you a second to say anything or introduce yourself in any other way that you'd prefer. Otherwise, jump right back in.
No, I think you did a good job of introducing me. It makes me feel very, very old when you say 800 alliances, because it suddenly reminds me I've been doing this for 23 years. So thanks.
Well, it is 23 years of experience that we get to benefit from. So thank you for joining us today. I think that's really helpful. Like, I know that you're currently still working with clients and developing partnerships today. And so what you've learned throughout your career and then how you're applying it in today's world, I think is super helpful for everybody here. Now, for everybody in the audience, there is the ability for you to chat in. I know some of you have already figured that out because you told me that I was on mute, but we also have the Q&A section. So as we're speaking, please feel free to ask any questions, whether it's in the chat or in the audience Q&A section, and Mike and I will get to them either in the moment or at the end. The session's about 45 minutes. Mike and I will be talking for about 30 of those, so we'll leave time at the end for questions. But of course, if there's anything glaring, we'll address it right away. Now, let's get started, Mike. I've got a bunch of questions for you, and I'm excited to hear all that you can share with us. But so in terms of when partner programs stall or alliances stall, a lot of leaders will assume it's like a resourcing issue or a strategy issue. But from your experience, what relationship gaps are actually kind of behind the scenes at play affecting performance?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I said when we were starting that I've conducted something like 800. Actually, it's more than 800 now. It's probably more like 900. But I've conducted a large number of benchmarks of alliances over the last 23 years. So first of all, I think it would be useful to understand what I mean by benchmarking, how I benchmark alliances. So very, very simply, early on in my researcher career, so we're going back to 2002, 2003, I was asking practicing alliance and partnership managers, what have you seen that works in a successful alliance or partnership? And very graciously, people told me. And I then noticed after 6-9 months of research that some of those things started to repeat on a regular basis. So I called those the common success factors or the critical success factors. And I then had a template that I could benchmark against. So, for example, we know that things like trust, senior executive support, common vision, clarity of joint business offerings, these are all best practices. If you have them in your alliance or partnership, then you're likely to be more successful. So that's what I was benchmarking. What's interesting when I was looking at some research for this webinar, is that if I go back to my database and I look at the different types of best practices, I would broadly split them into what I would call revenue and relationship. So, for example, revenue would be things like key metrics, alliance reward system, joint business plan, dedicated alliance manager, business value proposition, etc., etc. And these are all things that many partner managers will recognize. They will track those things. But if you look at the what I would call relationship best practices, you've got things like, well, trust, for example, common vision, process for joint problem solving, product fit with partners' offerings. Now, if you look at the scores of the successful alliances, what's interesting is that the alliances that come out as most successful are those that score well in the relationship area rather than the revenue area. And it kind of throws up the question, which is one of the questions we're going to debate on today's webinar, which is which comes first, revenue or relationship? You know, do you establish trust, which means that a partner is prepared to bring a lead or an opportunity to you? Or does the fact that a partner bring a lead to you generate some degree of trust? That's the interesting aspect for me.
I just can't wait to dig into this more because that is like the fundamental question that Michelle and I get in a lot of our
Yeah.
a lot of our consulting clients is just, you know, everyone wants reciprocal relationships. They can somewhat understand that it needs to, they need to start somewhere, but it's hard for companies to want to be the first to give. And then also, I think there's a bit of a personally, I think it's a misnomer, but it's a belief that some teams hold that partnerships and alliances just a lot of dinners and drinks and a lot of wasted
Yeah.
money on, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, partying together and calling that business. And I think that there's some of an established best practice there of, there's a reason why we do that type of stuff, but that's also not what partnerships is and what
Yeah.
alliances look like day to day. And so, yeah, I'm excited to dig into that a little bit more. So one question I have for you is, how do you distinguish between a partner who's unwilling to work with you or unwilling to deliver value or unwilling to engage, than someone who's just simply unable to perform due to some reason that's fixable? So I guess it's what is a block and what is a you haven't done something in the relationship or in the business to make it possible for partners to work with you.
Yeah. It's a good question. I see both types, to be fair. I think if you're noticing some of the apparently minor, but actually strongly indicative early warning signs, like partners not responding to you when you send them messages, then I would suggest that's what you're calling a block. That's something where the partner is not prepared to engage fully with you. On the other hand, if you've got a situation where you ask or you have an ask of a partner for something and they come back with an answer which says, we'd love to do that, but we can't because, or there is a good reason why we can't do that, then I think you're looking at some kind of institutional or regulatory restriction that partner has, which is not their fault. It's not under their control, and there is, as you quite rightly say, a subtle but very important distinction between the two. So, simple answer, I guess, is if your partner isn't talking to you or if they're not responding, and particularly if that happens suddenly, if the dialogue has been going well for a while and then suddenly they stop responding, then I think you can reasonably assume something's gone wrong or something's happening there, and they're throwing up some internal blockers. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one kind of early warning sign or a warning sign that there's a relationship issue.
Yeah.
And I guess when you were talking, I was thinking, okay, that's a pretty easy differentiator. If the partner is willing to engage and they're telling you, hey, I'd love to do, but blah, 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 I can't. There clearly there's a dialogue and there's a trust and there's information exchange. So like maybe the no relationship gap there. There's some other thing. Whereas the other one is a really strong signal that there's a relationship issue. What other warning signs are there that there might be a relationship gap within your alliances, whether it's new or established?
I'm trying to think back on my history of looking at alliances, and one example comes to mind of a major, well, it's quite an old one, so I'm out of NDA with both of the parties concerned. In fact, one of the parties doesn't exist anymore. So I did a fairly lengthy piece with BT, which is British Telecom in the UK, and Sun Microsystems. And BT regarded Sun as strategic and an alliance because they bought a lot of their kit, because they used Sun a lot in some of their work with clients, etc., etc., etc. So BT were asking Sun for things like a joint meeting. They were asking for the sharing of information around strategy, about future direction, about roadmap on technical advancements. And Sun weren't really responding. And it took a long while. In fact, to be fair, it took my intervention to ask the direct question. I went back to Sun and said, look, BT regard this relationship as a strategic alliance. What that means is, and then I listed a whole range of characteristics of a strategic alliance. And Sun said, we don't see it like that at all. We're just supplying BT with kit. You know, they're a great customer, but they keep asking us all these nonsensical questions about trust and about senior executive support, and can our senior executives come and visit them in London? We don't want to do any of that. We just want to sell them stuff. So the point I'm making there is it's not so much a blocker. It's you've got to be sure and you've got to be clear at the outset where the relationship is in collaboration terms. How is it viewed in collaboration terms? Because you might see it as extremely collaborative and you want an active and regular dialogue with your partner. You want to share some very sensitive information with your partner. But your partner may just see you as a very transactional distributor of their products and services. So you have to be careful that you're both on the same page in the type of relationship that you've got.
Yeah. Okay. So as you're talking, I was thinking, okay, so one signal is that the unresponsiveness is one piece, but when you ask the question, which is one solution to solving the gap here, when you ask the hard question, like, are you seeing this the way they were seeing this? And you get the response of like, you're asking nonsensical questions. It's pretty obvious that wouldn't be nonsense to them if they were interested in investing in a relationship at the same level. So I think that, you've highlighted not only just some signals, but also like a solution here that helps you uncover what to do next. And I think that's the important piece.
You'd be absolutely, well, perhaps you wouldn't be astounded. I don't know. You're obviously very well experienced in this area, but I'm constantly astounded, let's put it that way, by how infrequently organizations ask their partners, are you seeing this the way we are seeing it? And I have a catchphrase which I've developed over the last 23 years, which seems to make some sense, which is, if it isn't written down, it doesn't exist. So you say to two organizations, do you have a vision for this alliance relationship, or do you have a vision for this partnership? And they say, oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Oh, great, okay. Is it written down? Oh, we don't need to write it down. It's well known. Now, as an external consultant, I'm able to talk to both sides. So I can say, okay, well, can you describe your vision to me then? And the two descriptions are nowhere near the same. They're completely miles apart. And you just want to get the two sides together in the same room and say, look, you've got to write this stuff down so that there's a common understanding. But they don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I would have thought that at the alliance level, where like these are highly strategic global relationships,
Yeah,
that you're documenting more things. Because I think
yeah.
we see that a lot in partnerships, like in SaaS partnerships, a lot goes undocumented because the relationships are, I guess, maybe less broad in a lot of cases, or a lot more like long tail. And so, taking the time to do a lot of that stuff doesn't make sense ROI wise, but it does. And it does for certain types of partners. And so it's interesting. We do find the same thing. And actually, Michelle and I do a lot of interviews at the beginning of every engagement that we do, where we interview partners on behalf of our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And we ask the questions. And one of the questions we always ask is, you know, what's a great partnership to you, and how do you feel about the partnership with this company? And like 5 times out of 10, I'll get, what do you mean partnership? And it's like instantly you understand that there's like like a miss there. So that's really helpful. I guess changing from, I guess, what you see when things aren't working, what are the relationship patterns that you see with high performing partnerships?
Oh, well, to give you some context, the best practices that I've discovered so far, because it's an ongoing research piece, are 52. There are 52 of them that I can say statistically show up in commercially successful alliance relationships. Now, let's be clear. I'm not suggesting that all 52 show up in a commercially successful alliance relationship.
Right.
I'm simply saying that these things regularly show up in commercially successful alliances. Not all of them, but certainly they all have appeared in successful alliance relationships. To actually pick out half a dozen is very difficult, because there are different types. So sometimes you can have a very successful alliance relationship or partnership where the commercial model is extremely beneficial to both parties. And so it succeeds because they're both making a lot of money from it. Sometimes it's because the strategy of each organization is absolutely in lockstep. It's perfectly aligned to their strategy and where they want to go. Sometimes it's cultural. Sometimes it's as simple as two organizations really get on well together. But if you were to ask me, the real key indicators, the first one I would highlight is senior executive support. If you've got a senior executive from one organization who talks regularly and has a good relationship with a senior executive from the other organization, it clears a hell of a lot of the barriers out of the way, because it cascades down. If people see the two bosses, in inverted commas, talking, they think, well, shoot, maybe we'd better be talking as well, because our bosses are talking. We should be doing that. It's like observed behavior. So senior executive support, absolutely crucial. Trust, we've mentioned a couple of times. Trust is an area we could debate for a few hours without coming to a conclusion anyway. And the problem is it takes a while to generate, but you can lose it overnight. Common vision is one that I think is maligned. You mentioned in our previous discussion to the previous question you asked about the lack of governance models, or the lack of planning within relationships, and that's something that I've noticed over the last 5 years. Suddenly, everybody wants to be moving at the speed of light, and if you say to them, "What's your governance model?" or "Have you sat down and have you talked about a common vision?" typically they'll say things like, "Oh, we haven't got time for that. There are deals out there. We have to get those deals. If we don't get those deals, somebody else will get them." Well, and you think, well, yeah, but you need to slow down to go faster, if that makes sense. You need to slow down and say, let's have a common understanding about how you're going to solve issues, a governance model, how you're going to make the connections in each organization. So there's a high level of interaction at various levels, because that is going to save you time in the long run. You're not going to have to run back every 2 minutes and say, well, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to solve this problem? And the number of times I see escalations, and I book a meeting with the VP of Alliances, and he's saying, I'm really looking forward to the meeting, Mike. Oh, great. 10 minutes before the meeting, oh, I'm sorry, Mike, I've got to get on a fire call. Everything's on fire. I have to go and sort out this or that. That to me is another example of the lack of a robust governance model in the relationship, that you haven't figured out in advance, what are you going to do if things go wrong? So senior executive support, common vision, clarity of common objectives. What are the common objectives? I don't mean what are your objectives. We want to make loads of money. Yeah, okay, I get that. Both sides want to do that. But where specifically? Is it one particular market sector, or is it one particular major client? Where is it common? And where does it make sense for you to work together so you'll increase your chances of success? Things like that.
Yeah, I mean that the last one just hits home, because I find in a lot of that speed of light, and you tend to miss, at least in SaaS partnerships, a key conversation around what is it that we're both trying to achieve. And I think because the teams typically will go, okay, we are a complementary solution, they are in our ecosystem, they work with the same type of customer, the assumption is there that we're the right partners. But when you actually look at what the 6-month or 12-month goal is for that organization, where the resources are going, that isn't discussed. Does that align? And so, some companies might be focused on expanding into a new geography, whereas to attract more small businesses in Europe, for example. Whereas another company that looks like it's the right profile is actually investing all their time in growing in North America. And so, there's a massive disconnect there, and you can get to that really fast. And so, I guess the alliance best practice being make sure you're highly aligned at that level. And as far as goals in the partnership world, could look like a very simple conversation. You should know these things. But I think also when you're talking about executive alignment, a question that we get a lot is, and especially there's a lot of turnover in SaaS right now. There's a lot of people unfortunately losing their jobs and things like that. So it creates these rifts, or these cuts to the core as far as partnerships, and that momentum is hard to create, right? So you're like, oh no, I don't have my point of contact, and we had all these plans, and so you're missing forecasts. Well, when you have those levels of executive alignment, it's a really great way of ensuring that even if there is a change from organizational level, there's still the partnership is important at a senior level, and therefore will continue to create momentum. So creating those other connections is important for two reasons. One, clearly because it creates high performing alliances and creates results, but two, it's a great risk mitigator, I guess.
The other thing is I'm writing my I'm writing my third book at the moment. So my first book was called the Strategic Alliance Handbook, and that basically illustrated all the best practices and how you would use them. The second book was called the Strategic Alliance Field Book, and that was how to put it in practice in the field. And the third one, which hopefully will be published end of this year, beginning of next, is the Strategic Alliance Casebook. So I'm interviewing a lot of senior alliance managers about a case study where they can share hopefully a good example of an alliance that's gone really well. And I did a really interesting interview recently with a gentleman called Laurence Valroff, who's head of alliances for Dassault Systèmes. And he was talking about the relationship that Dassault Systèmes has with Capgemini. And he made the point that hasn't really been made to me before, and it made me stop and think for a moment. He said, what you've got to remember is that even in the most successful alliances and partnerships, it's not a linear straight line. If you made 5 million this year or 50 million this year, dollars, euros, pounds, whatever, don't necessarily expect that you'll make 75 next and 100 the next and 150 the next. It doesn't work like that. An alliance has ups and downs, and you've got to be able to accept the downsides sometimes. And the downsides are reflected, as you say, by external factors. Sometimes you're working with a partner, and the partner, for no reason that you're in control of, lays off a number of alliance managers on that particular alliance relationship. There's nothing you can do about that. Now, that's really going to slow down that alliance for a period of time. And it was a really good insight from Lawrence. It's the mark of a really good alliance relationship that you've put in place structures and people who will have the stamina to keep going when things get tough. And they will get tough from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the structure that helps you. Like, you can lean on the, "Oh, we've already
Yeah,
established our shared vision. We've already established our goals together. We've already
yeah,
established that there's result when we do X, or the customers are valuing this piece of our
yeah.
relationship." And so you can lean on those things. I guess while you're talking as well, I was thinking that, um, there is there's I guess the journey of your partnership, as you were saying, like, can ebb and flow, and a lot of, I know partnership leaders right now, especially, but CROs and everyone, is the question always comes down to, like, why did we miss forecast with partnerships, or how
Yep,
can we get
yep.
forecast with partnerships, and where are we going to get the next level of revenue coming from, and blah blah blah. When you have these major changes, when they're a surprise, you miss forecast.
Mm,
But you don't need to have surprises when you have that level of relationship where there is that conversation around, where are things going?
yeah.
How are things changing in your organization? Where are priorities lying now? And continuously checking in. So I was thinking while you're talking, is the alliance best practice that we can apply in partnerships is there's some level of this, like, strategic, um, you know, forward thinking, future thinking, alliance level conversation that will help our partnership leaders better anticipate changes in what their partners are going to deliver. And then they can invest their time in other partnerships where there is more alignment for that period of time, or continuously, like, make their partner program more robust, or whatever it is they need to do to kind of fill that gap. But what I was kind of hearing is, those are, you should expect change, and so you should
Mm,
anticipate how you navigate that, and one way
yeah.
to do is these
So,
conversations.
so you've mentioned it there. There are three best practices there that you've just talked about. The first one is business to business alignment.
Yeah.
So the best practice is you've got, let's say, three levels: strategic, managerial, and operational. So business to business alignment is where both sides identify a senior executive that can talk to each other, an alliance or partnership manager that can talk to each other, and a group of operational people who are actually working on common clients or common accounts that can talk to each other. That's business to business alignment. But you've also got internal alignment. Internal alignment is where throughout one organization there's a consistent story about the partnership, because very often that doesn't happen. And then the third best practice is relationship change management. When I ask alliance managers, have you got a document that articulates this relationship? In the better ones, they say, yes, we have. And you say, okay, what does it say about relationship change management? What do you mean? I don't understand what you mean. Well, what happens when things change? Have you got a written down process that articulates what you will do if the following things happen? And those things could be the alliance manager, for some reason, isn't there, either through sickness, maternity leave, they get laid off or whatever. But it could be a change in strategy from your partner. Your partner might pivot, to use the the buzzword of the moment. They'll pivot from, oh, we are a software company. Oh, no, we're not. We're a consulting company. OpenAI at the moment are openly saying that they're going to start a consulting business, not with people, but with AI bots, I presume. So there are various things that if you see them, if you know in advance what some of these things might be. So in advance, before they've happened, when you're in the honeymoon period, where everybody's liking each other and everybody's getting on with each other, that's the time to start talking about exit strategies. What happens if the following things happen? Well, we reserve the right to exit from this relationship, but nobody wants to talk about exiting a relationship when you're just setting up a partnership. It jars, you know.
Yeah, I do think that, I mean, governance is not a word that comes up a lot in SaaS partnerships.
No,
No.
no.
And it's I think partially because some of these relationships are a bit more transactional in nature, but
Mm,
that's part of, I think, the problem with
mm,
getting the right performance. So I'm saying that out loud, might be controversial, but like we don't
no,
have to have so many transactional relationships. We can have far fewer, less transactional relationships that deliver
yeah,
more value. But governance, like we can't be allergic to it. It is important to
mm,
understand, how do we work together? What are the rules of engagement? What
yeah,
happens if we want to exit? And decide together like what's fair, what that looks like. And the question that Michelle and I get sometimes is, the partnership isn't delivering on their side of the equation. How do we get them to reciprocate? How do we get them to do these things? But a lot of times that stems from or ends up in a place because originally the expectations weren't set at the beginning,
mm, yeah,
and governance conversation of what happens if you're not delivering on your end of the ball game.
mm,
It means that no one knows how to address the issue. So I think what you're saying is, if you plan for some of the things that could happen, and whether or not there's whatever intention or whatever reason there is those things that happen, we can decide how we're going to address them before they happen, and therefore we know what to do when it does. And so I think that's very, very helpful, I think, for the teams that are listening. Just the planning piece is a little bit missing sometimes, and we can
it always it always fascinates me. I I speak to an organization, or I speak to two organizations in an alliance relationship, and I say to them, we should have a session where you sit down for 2 or 3 hours, maybe 4 hours, and you figure out your strategy for the relationship and your governance model and your escalation procedures and whatever. And both sides will commonly say, "Oh, we haven't got time for that. We're too busy chasing deals." And I say, "Okay, so what's your predicted value from this alliance relationship? How much money are you expecting it to make for either side?" And in some combination, they say, "Oh, well, given a fair win, probably $50 million." And I say, "Okay, so you're running effectively a $50 million business, and you can't spend 4 hours talking about future direction, strategy. No, 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 we can't. And they don't see the disconnect there. They don't see how wrong that is. It's like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting too old for this. Maybe I'm just, you know, I'm just an old. In England, we would say I'm an old codger. I'm an old guy, very grumpy, because I know what best practice looks like. And when I go and talk to clients, they just don't do it. So I tell them about the best practices and I hammer it into them, and they say, right, Mike, got it, got it, got it. And you go away and they're not doing it. They're not putting it into practice. So maybe that's it. I don't know.
Okay, well, I mean, off script a little bit because you've brought up the question. Um, what is it? What is the difference, I guess, or how do you help teams actually start to action some of these steps? Because I think, like, to give credit to a lot of the partnership leaders that we talk to and a lot of the alliances managers, they are doing a lot of their best work. And
Mm,
sometimes
yeah, they
there's
are.
things that get in the way of them doing some of these best practices. So what maybe if you could provide like maybe one example, but like alliance best practice that doesn't get implemented because of common reason, how do you solve that?
Um, so the simple answer is I tell my clients that they can check the alliance best practice model for themselves. This is something that they can do themselves. They don't need me necessarily. So I'll give them a list of best practices, and it doesn't need to be all 52. You know, in the recent work that I'm doing, it's a list of 25, 5 in each of the 5 areas: commercial, technical, strategic, cultural, and operational. So I say to them, look, those are the best practices. Now, without talking to me, go and look at some of your alliances or partnerships and just sit down quietly in a corner with a cup of coffee and just score some of these best practices for yourself. Tell yourself how well are each of these things going. Now, at the end of it, you'll come up with a best practice score. Now, relate that best practice score to the amount of revenue that you're making from that relationship. And what you'll see is, and it's happened every time I've asked them to do it, and this is over 23 years, what you'll see is the ones with the higher best practice score are earning the most money. There is a direct correlation between best practice and earning more money. So you're showing yourself that following a best practice approach works. Now, does that mean you can follow every single best practice equally at the same time? No, of course not, because people have got limited time, there's limited resources, but at least you've then got a template. You can look at those best practices and say, which one's the most important, or which one's the easiest to do in the quickest period of time? And you can aim at the low-hanging fruit. And once you start to do that, you'll find that your vicious circle turns into a virtuous circle. So if you look at something like, I don't know, senior executive support, for example, and you just focus on that, and you get the senior executives to really buy into the idea of a relationship, rather than have your senior executives say, hey, we signed the partnership agreement 3 weeks ago, where are our leads? You know, if you can get them to really walk the talk, you'll find that trust will increase. You'll find that people will be more prepared to talk to each other. You'll find there's a knock-on effect amongst all of these best practices. So the answer to your question is, it depends on the particular situation that the organizations find themselves in, because we haven't talked about alliance maturity yet, or partnership maturity. Some organizations, particularly these days with the influx of AI and things, I mean, I'm working with a client at the moment, and I kid you not, this client is, I won't mention the name so I can talk about some of the practicalities of it, but they've got no more than 150 people. They're an AI company, and they're partnering with Accenture, that's got 800,000 people worldwide. And they expect Accenture to answer their emails within half an hour. They expect Accenture to respond at the speed that they respond. They can walk down the hall and talk to the head of marketing, the head of sales, and the CEO, all in 20 feet of each other. And they can't understand why Accenture are not responding as quickly. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. But everything is speed, speed, speed. And when I turn that on its head and say to Accenture, why are you partnering with this organization? Because there are only 150 people. The answer is because they're valued at $3 billion. This is a company of 150 people, and they're valued currently at $3 billion. I can't believe it. The inequality on both sides is mind blowing.
It sounds like what you're kind of saying is there's this for the massive global giants, and I think this comes up a lot for me as well, because I often work with the companies who are more like your client, where they're smaller but growing, and they're growing at a high rate, and they want these relationships at an alliance level with the big companies. And the question I often get is, how do we get them to answer our emails? How do we get them to pay attention to us? And I think their expectation is a lot that, like, within a year, this relationship is going to take off and they're going to go and it's going to be hugely valuable.
Yeah.
And like that could happen in some world, but it's more likely that it's a longer term relationship. And I think that under maturity of your alliances organization understands the length of time it takes sometimes to activate these longer relationships or more valuable relationships. Would you say, and this is probably my last question because we're coming up to time actually, what would you say is like the right thing, or what's the best thing that your client, the smaller company, could do to activate that Accenture relationship? And about how much time could you expect that to happen?
So I would say that whether it's Accenture or whether it's Capgemini, whether it's NTT Data, any of the large organizations, or indeed any of the larger vendor type organizations, the Cisco's, the Salesforces, the ServiceNow is massively grown now. What you've got to appreciate that what you're dealing with is a huge organization. And the idea that you can partner with the organization is a misnomer. What you have to find is, particularly if it's a consulting organization, is someone that's at partner level or managing director level, as Accenture would call it, or near partner level, and is looking for some way of making partner, is looking for a niche that they can own and grow themselves so that they can develop their career based on the fantastic technology of the partner. Now, unfortunately, when I talk to the smaller companies and I say, what does your stuff do? Very often I get the response, everything. We can do everything. We've got this AI thing and it can work in public sector, it can work in private, it can work in financial services, it can work in manufacturing. No, because you're never going to sell that to a big organization. You've got to be specific and you've got to be very clear who you're aiming at. Now, because you're clear in who you're aiming at, you're dealing with fewer people. Because you're dealing with fewer people, you can have those conversations quicker. So whereas it would take you 18 months to 2 years to go through some kind of major due diligence exercise of a large organization, you could easily have a pilot running with even a very large organization within 90 days. If you pick your area right, if you have enough self-knowledge and self-awareness. But a lot of these small organizations don't understand how a large GSI works. They don't understand what's important to the GSI. They think their technology is what the GSI is interested in. They're not. They're absolutely not. They're interested in their own services that they can generate on the back of but I'm sure you know that.
Oh, look, I feel like there was a lot of gold in that response. But one thing that I just absolutely love that you said that I think we can take in SaaS partnerships, like just an absolutely massive golden nugget here, is that focus on who are you and what do you do, like what value do you serve and what value does your partner benefit from, but then that the relationship, and this is like just to bring everything home, sometimes the gap is that the organization you're trying to partner with, you're looking at as the relationship between your two companies and not the humans that are doing the work.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
if we measure our relationships based on how do our companies work together simply from a revenue level, then of course there's lots of things we can glean there. But if we want to build relationships, we do have to remember that there are humans in those seats, butts and seats, who want promotions, who want to make partner, who want to do well in their jobs, and they want to be able to go home at 5 o'clock and see their families or whatever their goals are.
Yeah.
The level of goal that we could understand that would make all the differences. What does my counterpart care about? And same with the executive level. And so I just think that is an absolute, the way you articulated it is absolutely gold. And I hope everyone listening is like, that's, if you could leave with anything, the relationship gap show up in all of these ways. And there's lots of best practices for how to fix them. But your biggest one is probably the goal that you're missing with the person you talk to every day.
Yeah.
So Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we are at time here. I'm seeing a question, Stephen, regarding Accenture. The probably most important aspect is don't interfere with our Salesforce and SAP partnerships, or you're likely not to make progress. Do you have any comment there, Mike?
So Accenture has probably, and to be clear, I'll eat my own dog food, as some Americans would say. So when I say I'm working with Accenture, what I mean is I'm working with Accenture UKIA. That's the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Africa. So that's the area that I'm working with. And again, like many large organizations, Accenture allows each of their major economic units, of which UKIA is one, to have self-determination. They can, to some extent, decide which partners they're going to work with. Now, where they don't have any choice is in what they call the business groups. So Accenture have got certain partnerships, certain alliances, which are so important that they've actually got a business group dedicated to them. So SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, obviously, but also the three hyperscalers, AWS, Google, and Microsoft Azure, and then Salesforce, Adobe, ServiceNow, etc., etc. So you've probably got about a dozen business groups. And these are like big, big, big icebergs crashing around in the sea. So I agree with the comment. If you're a small partner and you get in the way of some of these guys, they'll wipe you out overnight. If a push comes to shove, whether they talk to you, the small partner, or talk to Salesforce, they're going to talk to Salesforce every day of the week because they can make so much more money from it. One of the tricks that I see a lot of smaller organizations missing is the fact that they can piggyback some of those major, major, major relationships. So if you have a strong relationship with a Salesforce or a ServiceNow, if your SaaS software or whatever, you've got a native integration with some of those organizations, you can use that as a way of engaging with Accenture. But don't get in the way of them. No, I agree with the comment.
That's funny. Okay, well, look, Mike, this has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot, but also I just really appreciate you spending the time to share things that you've learned
I
over.
enjoyed it. It was great.
Yeah, and look, for everyone watching, Mike mentioned he's going to be releasing his third book at the end of the year, hopefully. But he's got two other books. He also has Alliance Best Practice. Go check him out on LinkedIn. We'll be sharing an email after this with links to meet Mike and a big follow up with the recording for this. But yeah, any final words, Mike, for the group before we sign off?
Only that, on a very, very practical basis, if anybody is interested in reading up further, if you've attended this webinar, let me know because I can get you a significant discount on the books. You don't have to pay the full price. So I think it's half price, but I'll have to check that out. So don't buy it from Amazon. Come and see me.
Right.
Which doesn't mean to say that I'm in any way criticizing AWS. With the advent of AI these days, I'm petrified that I'll say something and I'll be deluged from Google or some other browser saying, why do you hate AWS so much? I don't, honestly. I use them every day, really.
Okay. Yeah, well, I guess we have to, it's a new world. We'll have to figure it out.
It is a new world. Yeah. I've got to remember that.
Yeah. Okay. And so this has been Partnerships in Play, all about relationship gaps and how they're impacting your channel partnerships. Hope you, learned something new today. And if you have any questions or comments, please reach out. Michelle and I are always happy to chat about how we can help you understand what to do next with your partnerships and grow what you're already doing. So anyways, thanks for joining and see you at the next one.